Hi, Clutter Fairy fans. This is the Clutter Fairy Weekly for October 10th, 2023. I'm your co-host, Ed Gumnick, and I'm speaking with Gayle Goddard, certified professional organizer and owner of the Clutter Fairy in Houston, Texas.
Hi, everybody. The Clutter Fairy Weekly is the webcast and podcast that digs deep into the clutter that piles up between you and the life you want to be living. We explore the habits and behaviors that lead to clutter, and we suggest strategies to slow the accumulation, reduce the collection, and comfortably manage the stuff we decide to keep.
If you're new to our Zoom meeting, we want to let you know that you can share your comments and questions via the chat feature, and I'll try to make sure Gayle gets to them before we move on to another topic. You can also use the raise hand feature if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment yourself via audio or video. And we're streaming live on Facebook, so you can share your questions and comments there, and I'll relay them to Gayle. We're going to start, as we usually do, by talking about last week's Weekly Tittle, which was called Hold On Tightly or Let Go Lightly. The assignment was to examine your relationship with an object to which you feel a sentimental, nostalgic, or other type of emotional connection. Let's hear from our participants in Zoom and on Facebook who experimented with the tittle this week. Please let us know in the comments. YouTube viewer Sarah shared her report on dealing with her late husband's stuff. Sarah writes, "My husband passed away in June. Although his death was expected, I was surprised by the impact of shock and grief on my thinking process. I need to declutter to sell my home. I wanted all the hospital and illness-related stuff out, so that's what I did, including being able to donate some of those supplies to others. After a couple of months, I was able to remove almost all of his clothes, hats, belts, winter gear, and clothing he never wore. I'm keeping several of his long sleeve shirts for a quilt that my sister will make for me. I have plans to resell or donate his electronics and music equipment. There will still be personal items left, and these I can take my time with. Thank you, Gayle and Ed. This episode came at just the right time for me."
I'm so sorry for your loss, Sarah. I know that was a shock. And also that it happened, it just happened 6 months ago and you're already working on stuff is really amazing, frankly. Yes, medical gear and illness related stuff is usually a problem for most people and it goes out quickly, most often, mostly because it's such a chaotic burden in the house. I'm not surprised that those were the items that went out first. It sounds like you're tackling the items in the stages that work for you and working towards your goal to sell the house, which is great. You manage the categories of stuff based on how you're feeling in the moment. And so you're supporting yourself emotionally that way while you work. It sounds like a really solid approach to me. And thanks for sharing your story. I'm sure a lot of our community can relate to this. Most of us have been through some version of this, whether it's a spouse or a parent, and trying to manage the objects related to that person, especially in the early months of the process while you're grieving, is very hard. So it sounds like you've been very careful with yourself and done a good job of moving forward while respecting where you are emotionally. And thanks for the share. I'm sure it'll be really helpful to people.
Paula says, "I decluttered the freezer by making several batches of jam from fruit from my friend's tree that's been in the freezer since July.
Ooh,
It was too hot to be in the kitchen for hours back then. Now there's plenty of room in the freezer."
awesome. Plenty of room in the freezer and lots of jam to eat. That sounds great.
Right?
Wonderful.
Charity reporting in from Facebook says, "Good morning on this rainy, excellent day to stay in and get the decluttering boogie woogie dance."
Awesome. We're glad to be company with you while you're inside the rain.
While you're dancing through your clutter.
Yes, we haven't come up with a clutter free dance for decluttering. We should work on that.
Okay, let's go ahead with our main topic.
Okay.
There are many circumstances and relationships in which the responsibility for stuff becomes blurred between parents and children, among roommates or housemates, between spouses or partners, in the handling of estates, and so on. Today, we're going to discuss how to manage and share responsibility for clutter among interested parties with clear communication and gentle negotiation.
I've said it before, organizing stuff is fun for me, but I know it's just a chore for the rest of you. So let's chat about how you work a chore that you're sharing with others in your life. Like any chore, it's best divided up either evenly or along skill set lines while paying attention to who owns the items being organized. Also, the relationship between the parties adds nuance to the process as well. For example, our first relationship type is organizing between parents and kids. And you assume I mean adults with children living at home, but it could be adults worrying about their adult children. Just yesterday, I was on a phone call with a mother who was in her mid-70s talking about her 50-year-old child, which I put in air quotes. Mom is still going to the daughter's space to organize. And if you're a middle-aged child and you're still not responsible for your own space, we've got to have a whole nother conversation than what we're going to talk about today. But for those parents of kids that are still at home, it's like any other chore. It needs assigning and it needs task management. So you want to give responsibility to a kid around decluttering something, but you want to do it in an age appropriate way. So you want to ask a kid to do a chore that their brain can actually process and manage. And so it's not like you can say to a 5-year-old, clean your room and walk away. You know, the success rate of that is a big goose egg, right? So you do have to give them assignments that are more age appropriate to what their brain is able to do in the moment. You also want to take that work time into account. Like you can't expect a 5-year-old to work for 3 hours unassisted and unsupervised. And the idea that they would stay focused for that long is completely unrealistic, right? So
3 minutes, maybe.
right. You might be able to come up with a task that is 15 minutes long and keep their attention for that amount of time and then move on to something else. An older child obviously is going to have more attention span, but also more resistance. So it is something that you have to manage around what seems reasonable for the age of the kid that you're trying to get to work on something. The idea of body doubling in general is I'm working with you and we're working on the task together so that I'm there to help you stay focused, to show you how to do it and have you follow my lead, or for me to do the same things that you're doing at the same time so that we're both working on the task together to make it move forward. And it helps people with, it's an ADD technique to help people stay focused. But the idea of you working with your child on the task, especially if they're younger, or if at any age of a kid that has trouble with decision making, or if they're actively trying to avoid the process, if they're just trying to like, I don't want to deal with this. My point is, I wouldn't say, I need you to organize your closet and then walk away. I think, especially for younger kids, it's very important for you to be there. You're trying to teach them a new skill. You're trying to train them how to do it. They don't innately understand how to organize a closet. They don't understand the steps of doing that process. And so it's important for you to be there and be coaching a kid through, here's how we're going to focus on the jeans and we're going to sort the jeans. And then we're going to decide if, do these all still fit? And the ones that don't fit, we're going to take out. And, those ABCD steps to how do I change the way that the closet is laid out right now? Or what do I do about, getting the pants under control? And you're going to go model that behavior with them. You're going to help them through that process. The more that you do it, just like anybody that I work with, the more that I do it with them, the more they feel able to tackle it themselves. And so at some point, you may be able to leave a kid alone and say, I want you to go through your shirts and, or I want you to organize that drawer, and then walk away and let them do it. But until that point comes, until you feel like they can actually do it without supervision, I would expect that this is a chore that you're going to share with your kid. And you're doing that so that you can train them to be able to do it themselves and transfer the skills, teach them how to approach it, and find out where they're having trouble. I do hear from parents sometimes that little kids, like their brains aren't developed. You can't expect them to do things that grown adults can do, or at least not in the same way. And so some kids have a lot of trouble with, they're sentimental about everything that they touch or see. And therefore decision-making for them is paralyzing because they can't imagine giving up anything that they're looking at. And so if you have one of those kids that's stuck in, I can't let any of it go, then there's some point in having time spent with the kid talking through, okay, we're not giving away all your toys. We're going to make a choice between A and B. And this is what I'm going to do with the one that you decide is okay to go. I'm going to go take it here. I'm going to go donate it to this, church group, this kids room, this blah, 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 right? And so you're teaching them the concept of making donations and how that is a responsible thing to do and how that is a supportive thing to do, and that it also makes it easier for their life. And so coaching kids through that decision-making process, if they're finding it really difficult, is, it's a good thing. It's a good way to train them to get past their feeling paralyzed about it. And there's some things it's like, they're not, like this year, they're not going to be able to make decisions about fill in the blank. It's too overwhelming, but they might be able to make decisions about something else over here. And so just like anybody, you can start with what is easier, less distressing, less triggering, and train them on the decision-making process over something that doesn't send them off into orbit, right? Like if the stuffed animals makes their head explode at the idea of letting go of stuffed animals, don't start with that. Start with something else that's less distressing, and hopefully slowly coach over time. I mean, just like any skill that you teach a little kid, right? They don't always catch on immediately. They have to be reinforced. They have to learn it over and over and over again until they learn it. And so you're going to do the same thing with organizing techniques and decision making, and setting priorities and choosing one between the other, and that kind of stuff is all part of training that you need to give them. So the teenagers that actively don't want to have anything to do with it, like that's a whole nother management process. So you may want to stay present with them and help them through decisions, and help them pick an area to focus on so that they can't actively avoid it or stuff it all under the bed or shove it all in the closet. And, many a mother has said, clean your room, and then left the room and come back to a clean room only to discover it's all under the bed or it's all in the closet. And so it is something that if you can't trust them to do it on their own without making a mess, then you don't get to give up that chore yet. You still have to go and work with them. But I think divvying up the time, even if you're spending the same amount of time, if you are getting their participation, then there's 2 man hours for every hour that's being worked on. And so at least it's lessening the amount of time that it gets through it. And it also honors the agency of the kid. Like, this is their stuff and it's their decision to make. And so if you are participating with them and letting them make the decisions, you're saying to them, I'm honoring your right to make the decisions about your stuff. I'm telling you that we need to do some work here. I'm telling you that this is too chaotic. I'm telling you that this is interfering with my ability to clean the room, with my ability to deal with your laundry, with my ability to, make the bed, I'm not happy with all of the dead food that's in here, whatever things that happen with a teenager, right? But you can be telling them you need to be able to reduce the clutter, make it more organized so that you can do things. But at the same time, you're respecting their right to make decisions about their own stuff. And so you're reinforcing the idea of it's their ownership, it's their agency, it's their right to make decisions. You're just forcing them to make the decision. It's by being present and focusing on the task. And so there's ways to not take over their decision-making process and prevent them from actively avoiding the process completely by being present and staying there with them and focusing on it.
Connie says that the version of cleaning up in which you hide everything has been called hiding up.
That's a good name for it. Where we shove it all in the closet instead of cleaning up.
Which is also what adults do right before a party.
Or when somebody knocks on the door when they have a surprise guest at the front door. That's good. We need to use that. That's another ism that we need to put on our list. Hiding up.
Hiding up needs to go on the list.
Yeah, we need to start using that in the concept of cleaning up before the party. All those boxes full of mail in the closet are hiding up. Oh, okay. So also in terms of kids, you want to add decluttering or organizing or making keepsake decisions, a regular chore on the chore chart. If you are, clean your bathroom, clean your room, do your laundry, whatever chores you have, go mow the lawn. You want to add decluttering, organizing projects onto that chore chart so that they're actually going to be working on something and see it as a regular, like you're teaching the maintenance concept of organizing, right? And so if it's on the chore chart, then they are actually going to circle back to it on the regular, and it's going to be something that they consider part of maintaining their space. And we're training them that it's part of maintaining their space. I would just give instead of saying, again, you don't want to say, go clean your room, go organize your room. You want to give them specific targets. So this week, the organizing chore is, I want you to go through your jeans and find out which ones still fit, and let's remove the ones that don't work anymore. And this week, I want you to go into that drawer in the bathroom, and I want you to, pull out the stuff that's bad, and I want you to clean it, and I want you to, find out which products you don't want anymore, and we're going to get rid of those, and like we're going to organize that bathroom drawer. This week, I want you to go and straighten up your jewelry and pull it all back together and make sure it's all stuff you still care about. And you can give them very targeted things to work on in their own environments, work in their bathroom, work in their closet, work in their room, work on the desk, whatever, but make them have a very specific organizing chore as part of their regular chores every week. Between parents and kids, it's all about parents training the kids on how to organize and what that looks like and how it impacts their life and makes their life function better. And so you're trying to transfer a skill. And so they don't really understand that skill yet. They don't understand the nuance between cleaning and organizing, decluttering. And so you're going to have to show them what to do. And you're going to have to show them how to manage the roadblocks. You're going to have to talk about decision making, and you're going to have to help them with the decisions. It's not like it's super slow. Like there's something about, you can teach somebody to move a broom around, and it's not exactly, it doesn't take a long time, but this is a more sophisticated skill. And depending on how old the kid is, they may or may not have the brain power really to process all of it. And so you're introducing concepts that you're going to have to keep introducing over their life as they grow. But everything that you do now is going to help them live better later. And it's also going to point out to you if your kid is having issues. If this is how you're going to find out if your kid is one of the ways you're going to find out the kid is super ADD is in this organizing process. They may not be able to understand or absorb the skills around it. And so it's a way for you to sort of take their temperature to see where they're coming from. And if there's something else going on that's not, it's just that their brain works different, then you can lean into adjusting the solutions based on what you discover as you work with the kid. And so don't judge them when they're 5, it's one thing, they haven't had any time to really learn anything yet. But, when they're a teenager, you're going to have a better idea of how distractible the child is, how easy it is for them to focus, whether they do everything only under the gun, only under a horrible deadline, only under extreme pressure, that kind of stuff. That's going to be sort of signals for you that there might be something else that they're having to deal with. And the sooner that you find that out, the better, because there is help out there. And the sooner that you get the help and start adjusting their mindset around it, the easier it will be for them to cope long-term over their lifetime. So we want to go for that.
Well, and it seems like part of what you're trying to communicate too is that this is not a punishment. This is just a normal bit of life. Don't you think when mom or dad said, go clean your room, that sort of felt like a punishment?
100%.
And so, it's, if instead you're conveying that, well, this is just part of what goes along with when you have stuff of your own. This is your
Right.
stuff. So you're teaching them a little responsibility.
You have to manage it, right? Like
Yeah.
if you want it to stay in good shape, if you want to be able to find it, if you want to be able to use it, you have to manage it. I gave a speech to a room full of teenage girls,
I'm sorry.
And I know it was a club. It's been years now. And I was early on in my career, and I took this gig and I went out there to talk to these girls. And I was talking to them about organizing. We were talking specifically about organizing their room. And one of the little girls raised her hand and said to me with a straight face, "That's what the maid is for." And I was like, "You did not just say that, sister. You did not." And I'm sure that incredulity washed over my face in front of that room. And all the moms were at the back of the room. And I was like, I can't look at the moms right now, because if I look at the moms, I'm going to have so much judgment on my face. I cannot even tell you how horrified I am that she just said that. Even if you have a maid, you don't want to teach that you don't have to learn or know how to do any of this because someone else is always going to be cleaning up behind you, because the truth is they're not. And, moms manage their households according to their own requirements and needs. And they're going to clean up all the time because it annoys them that the kids make a mess. But A, if you're not that mom, or B, you're that mom and you have a maid, I still think that there is benefit for a kid learning how to clean up behind themselves in some way and how to manage their own things. Because guess what? That kid that just has a maid to handle it all is going to go away to college and have a roommate. And guess who's not going to have a maid in the room with the roommate, and how miserable the roommate's going to be, and how bad, what a shock that's going to be when there isn't somebody cleaning up behind them every single second of the day. I mean, she went on to belabor, because I started to ask some questions like, but what happens when you get married? Like, what are you going to do when you have a family of your own? She's like, "Oh, I'll have a maid." Like, she was all about the solution of the problem was the maid. I'm like, "Oh my God, you are making me so angry right now. I cannot even be answering you how I want to." I just wanted to start yelling at this little kid. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably not a good idea. But it was quite a shock. But it is some of the people that live with moms that are super organized or super clean, who go behind and they are very inspired to keep everything up, and they do it all for their kids because it annoys them, or they like cleaning, or it annoys them that their kids don't do it well enough or fast enough for their preferences. And so those children that have someone behind them fixing it all for them without any understanding or recognition that it's happening, when do kids notice that kind of stuff? They don't. And so they're in for the shock of their life when they go somewhere and they don't know how to do their own laundry, and they don't know how to scrub the toilet, and they don't know how to clean up behind themselves, and they don't know how to take the laundry and put it back in the closet. Like, what a shock it is when somebody's been doing that for you all of your life, and then suddenly that person can't go to college with you and can't move in with you to your first apartment. And oh dear, won't you be surprised? Okay, I'm about to move on to roommates or housemates. Speaking of, if we have finished the comments from there.
Yeah, I think so. Let's go on.
Okay, so the roommates or housemates, now we're not dealing with parents and kids, so that we don't have that age difference or that brain development issue anymore. The relationship between roommates, the separation of the stuff is much clearer for roommates. Everybody has their own things, and they know, this is my room, this is my stuff. And it's very easy to know if you can organize it or not, because like, that's your stuff, so I can't organize your stuff. It makes the line very clear. You will have, as adults, you'll have different organizing styles. You'll have different chaos thresholds, like the level at which the chaos makes you crazy will be different depending on who you are. And so that's going to impact your conversations between you. But everybody needs to compromise on the common shared areas. So we all have our own, if you're a roommate, everybody has their own bedroom and may or may not have their own bathroom. If they have one bath, they're going to have, each of them are going to have a portion of the bathroom probably. But that delineation becomes different when you get into the other parts of the house where it's a common area, where we're all using the kitchen, we're all using the dining room, we're all using the den, right? And so dividing up, finding the stuff that's there, dividing it up, who's going to do what in that room, compromising on how that area is going to look, how that area is going to be managed, is part of the conversation that needs to happen between roommates. You definitely want to negotiate a division of labor, or even if you decide that both of you are going to work on everything together. That's a decision that needs to be made. And then you also want to talk about how frequently you want to work on the concept, working on cleaning up, working on organizing stuff. Not everybody's going to agree on how often it needs to be done. And that's going to be driven by your organizing style and at what point the chaos makes you crazy. So negotiating how frequently it needs to be done will be a compromise in itself. Somebody will think it's not often enough. Somebody else will think it's too often. Both of you will be unhappy, but you can still pick a frequency that sort of it splits the middle between both of your desires, and then organize the house on that schedule, decluttering it on that schedule, cleaning it up on that schedule. It is, it's a separate chore. It's a related chore, but it's a separate chore to organize something and clean it. So organizing the books on the bookshelf is one thing. Dusting the bookshelf is another thing. So you may do them at the same time, but you may also need to have separate discussions about, okay, so now our collective books don't fit in the bookcase anymore. And we need to decide, do we really want to add another bookcase, or do we want to thin this collection? And we both need to take out some of each of our collections to make this fit better. And so having that negotiation about what stays in the common areas and how to share is, the big negotiation between roommates and housemates. If you shift that relationship between spouses or partners, so now you've put the emotional investment up a notch, you're still going to have different organizing styles, and you're going to have different chaos thresholds. And you're going to have, you're going to add to that the idea that there's going to be a different understanding about who's in charge of the household roles, whether the husband is saying that, the man is saying, this is my job or your job based on gender or based on their belief systems around division of labor in a relationship. There's going to be that kind of everybody has different understandings about what those roles are supposed to be. And so your belief system around the man always takes out the garbage, the woman is always cleaning the kitchen. Maybe there's some expectations that you have around that need to be spoken out loud and see if everybody agrees. You may find that, you don't want to take out the garbage. You want to be in charge of something else. So having that conversation around what the roles are and what you are assuming the roles are versus what your spouse or partner thinks the roles should be, they may not be in alignment. So you need to figure that out. You definitely want to be clear in your negotiations, and you want to share between what you both do or what you divide up as chores. Also, what's acceptable to work on and what feels like a violation. So for people that are super attached to your stuff, and we've had this conversation about organizing before, it's never a good thing for you to go try to organize somebody else's stuff. And particularly in a relationship, a spousal relationship, where you don't want the husband going in and organizing your craft room. You don't want to go into the garage and organize the husband's tools. There are certain things that are going to feel like you have very tight ownership over. It's my stuff, stay away from my stuff. And so you want to have that conversation about, it's okay for you to organize in here, what this is our shared stuff, but it's not okay for you to touch these things. This is stuff that I need to do alone, or I will feel violated if you get in the middle of or try to mess around and move around. And so having those conversations so that it's very clear what we collectively are working on, what we have to separately work on, and what feels like if you touch it, I'm going to feel very violated. Making that clear between you, and then talking about the compromises that can be made to address everybody's priorities. There is no universe in which, in a relationship, where you guys aren't compromising about organizing, because there's always a difference between how much of an organized person you are, where you are on that spectrum of OCD organized to hoarder, which is a very long and wide road, right? And so it's unlikely that both of you are going to come in at the same place on that. And so negotiating around each of your positions and coming up with the compromises at work, The person that's super organized is probably going to have to live with less organization than they would on their own. The person that is more disorganized or more comfortable with a higher level of chaos is going to have to do more organizing earlier than they want. And so everybody's going to be compromising, and you just have to decide what compromises are going to be made. But trust me, everybody's going to have to make some. You're not going to be the only one in the relationship making those compromises.
Connie says, in anticipation of today's topic, I approached DH to see if we could schedule a 2 to 3 hour slot every week to get our apartment clean and tidy, as we no longer hire any help for this, and it was showing. She goes on to say, eventually I hope to add a scheduled decluttering slot, but right now I am trying to do this via body doubling with a friend.
Cool. All right. And nice of you to ask. And you're, saying the house needs support. We're not paying for a maid. Somebody's got to do it. I'm not going to live in squalor. We're not going to let this apartment devolve to nothing, to chaos. And so let's work on it together. And good for you. Okay, I'm going to move on to talking about estates. And I called that relationship out specifically because I'm working on a project right now where this is popping up really big.
And this is also really relevant to a lot of our audience demographic. We have a lot of older people
trying to deal with this exact thing, right?
Dealing with elderly parents or deceased parents.
Right. So when there's just one heir, it's super easy that one heir gets to make all the decisions. But most of the time, there's two or more. And if there's two or more people trying to talk about an estate, you get into a whole nother ball of wax, right? And I have to say, it is not right to leave it all to the closest person living near the estate. You absolutely have to recognize the huge amount of work that's needed, and you need to support whoever's getting stuck doing most of the work. The executor may not live nearby, but they're still responsible legally for fixing it, for clearing out the house. And so if the executor's not near, but there's other siblings that are, the job may be delegated to the siblings, but the burden of the physical work falls on one or two siblings most of the time. And they're the siblings that feel responsible to do the work. And then other siblings that don't want to face it, let them do it without helping. And a lot of times what's happening is that they're feeling the grief, and the idea of going in the house makes them upset, and touching their parents' stuff or the spouse, for instance, it makes them upset to think about it. But in an estate clearing situation, there's always kids and everybody's having their grief response. And yet we still have to empty the house, right? And so there's usually one kid that's more comfortable going to do the work than the other, or that they're close by and their life situation makes it easier for them to go to do the work. And so once somebody steps up, then the rest of the siblings sort of relax and let them do it, and often leave them to do it alone, which is completely unreasonable and completely lays a huge burden on that sibling or siblings that are willing to go and do the work. And you just can't do that. You can't leave them to it. It's such a huge job, and everybody's struggling. And the idea that you would go, oh yeah, she's close by, she can handle it. No. There's way more work than that. And I'm telling this story because I'm currently working on an estate where there's 4 siblings, and the house is a 2-story house, completely full. The kids grew up in the house. There were still things from their high school days in the house. So 4 children and the parents lived in this house. And then the kids have been gone, and the parents have been, like, their favorite entertainment was to go like estate sale shopping. They would go and do resale stores. Yeah. So there was a huge amount of stuff in this house, and it was so hard to get started because there was no room to move around. Like I've been eking out little corners of the room slowly over time. It's gotten better, but the youngest kid was the executor, and that kid lives out of state. She doesn't even live in Texas, but she has come down, and she's been working remotely and living in the mother's house, living in their house to work on the estate. And 18 months have gone by. And the other 3 siblings, 2 of them live in Houston, and the third lives in San Antonio. And yet no one seems like they can come and be helpful. I've been over there so many times, and the siblings are just MIA. Now, they're certainly willing to give instructions, and they're certainly willing to fight over who gets what stuff. But there is nothing more frustrating than the sibling that's claiming items from the house without doing any work to empty the house. And so now the estate is paying me because she was struggling to get it done by herself and work full time as well. And she was getting, like, she's in the house and she's grieving everything around the house. It reminds her of her mother, like she's living in her mother's house. There's nothing more triggering than that of grief. And so, like, okay, like somebody said to her, you should hire a professional. And she was like, oh, that's a good idea. And so now we're making headway. But I watched this situation, and I've been interacting with them for so long that it's so much of sibling, distress, but they're leaving it to her. They're surrendering it to her. And I feel bad for her. And so my point about all this is, if you're working on an estate, don't assume because somebody stepped up that they're having an easy time of it, or it's a light job, or they don't need a lot of help. And if you can't come and do the work, if your job prevents, then hire some people to help, do some research for them, help those that are working on the job, like do some administrative work if there's something that you can do, making lists on the computer, hire the movers, do something to be supportive of the person that's on the ground trying to clear out the estate, because it is such a massive amount of work. And everybody's got to participate, is my point. Everybody has to be transparent about it. Everybody has to get in there and participate. It's a huge job. So organizing impacts all in a space, everything in the space, and everybody needs to participate to manage their own things at the least. And all need to tackle some shared space and shared items. So if the burden falls to one person only, it's going to be a lifelong argument between you. And that whole negotiation thing, you don't want to assume it's all going to go for one person. So better to work out a way that you can share the work and handle it together. And that way everybody's doing the annoying chore. No one's carrying a disproportionate share. And hopefully no one is building resentment waiting to explode out. So we want you to negotiate between the 2 of you, so that the 2 of you or the 3 of you or however many people, like if it's a family with kids, like there may be lots of stakeholders to have this conversation about. But we definitely want to be transparent about it and talk about it up front and divvy it up in a way that feels fair to people, so that the work still gets done and no one is feeling like they're carrying the burden alone, because that resentment will last forever, as I have heard from many a client.
Maida mentioned that a remote session and pictures helped her.
Meaning that somebody else worked and she looked at the pictures, or she worked and showed the pictures to somebody else. We'll let her answer that. I'm just curious.
Let her answer that. I don't
but the idea
she's
is,
talked to us about it before.
Luckily, because of Zoom technology or FaceTime, people can be zoomed in,
right?
And they can be, they can be remotely looking at things. Oh, both, she says. Yeah. Okay. So it's a great way that people can participate that aren't actually able to be present, but they can still participate in some of the decision making and provide information. Maybe they have knowledge about stuff that it makes it easier to make decisions if somebody knows something about it. And so Zoom is our friend in this process, and you can share responsibility that way, 100%.
Creative Planet Janet says, if I were a hospital patient, I'm sure my home situation would not be determined as safe to go home to. I live alone with no friends or family able to help. Does anyone know what normally happens? I think I would be in big trouble if I needed major surgery. Can you speak to that a little bit? I know you've handled a situation like that at least once. I do remember you going in.
Yes. I had a client who hired me from rehab. She was in a rehab hospital, and the doctor would not let her go home, until she could get in with a walker. But the house was so full, like she was clearly, when I went in there, she was clearly a hoarder. So the stuff started sort of mid-height on one side and came into a valley in the middle and then went back up on the other side. There was no way she was getting a walker in there. And so we had to go in and clear. The goal was to clear out the space so that she could be released from rehab. We worked on it for 2 months. It's a big job. That's a whole nother conversation about clearing out and the mice and the dead eggs. And there's a whole kinds of stories around this one, but we got about 2/3 of the way through the apartment and then she passed away. And so she never got to come home because we couldn't clear it out fast enough. And so you're definitely, I mean, there's going to be places where the doctor is going to say to you, like, you can't safely move with a walker in your space, then you can't go there. They're not going to let you do that. Oh yeah. And he's reminded me, we had a member of our audience who had a hip surgery, and then he had to hire us because he couldn't come home with the walker and get through the ground floor. And so we had to go and he hired me to go and clear a pathway in his apartment so that he could get, the walker through to the desk and to the kitchen. And we had to clear the stairs so he could safely go up the stairs. And so we had lots of areas where we didn't even do a whole lot of, we got rid of a bunch of stuff, but we did not do a typical decluttering job. We were just trying to cut a path
Completely
so that he could
tactical.
safely, so he could get through into everywhere that he needed. Can he get into the bathroom? Can he get to his bed? Can he get up the stairs? Can he get to the kitchen to get food? And because he lived alone. And so it was definitely a requirement of the doctor that he be able to do that before he could be released. And so I'm sure when you're laying in the hospital bed, you want to be able to go home as soon as they're going to let you go. And so it is something that I've had to tackle more than once.
Deborah commented to Janet's comment, if you're in good health now, start now. I mean, this is a topic we talked about a lot, about while you make hay while the sun shines, do what you can right now so you don't find yourself in that difficult situation. And Deborah added, if you can make it better than before, every day, take out the trash, wash dishes, do laundry, choose a floor/drawer/3 old sheets. Can you make it better than before, no matter how small?
Right. Yeah. We're not aiming for Martha Stewart show home. We're just aiming for functionality.
Well, and Janet went on to say, I need real life physical help, but so far haven't been able to find qualified people. I'm wondering if physical or occupational therapists do this kind of work.
Not exactly. You might get a physical or occupational therapist to like clear a pathway for you. But all they're really going to do is it just depends on whether they feel inclined to be helpful in that way. No, it's not typically part of their job description. You want to hire an organizer type person. That's somebody to come in and do the work for you. If that's what you need and you don't feel like you can physically do it yourself, then hiring somebody who's an organizer that's got training in the area, that has an ethical code around it, and it's their job to come and make it so that you can move around better. That's your best option. And you can always, ask your friends to come and be helpful. But when you ask your friends, or your family, you get as much as attention as they're willing to give, which may not be, very long. And it may not be commensurate with the amount of work that needs to be done. Like they're willing to give you an hour, but you need 60 hours worth of work. So that's really not going to get you anywhere. So it's hard to count on free sources of labor in this environment. It's a project that really needs hired experts to come and work with you.
Steve asked, what about if you live in the parent's house and they pass?
It's always hard, isn't it?
Any special considerations there? I mean, obviously you're up to your eyeballs in stuff that has a
it's related
sentimental
to
or emotional meaning.
Yeah. And again, the biggest issue for the estate that I'm working on is that it's so hard and emotional for the sibling that's living in the house because she's surrounded by the parent's stuff. And so I guess part of it depends on, are you you're living in the house, and are you going to continue to live in the house? Like, have you inherited the house and now you're going to live there? Or were you living in the house to take care of the parents, and now the parents are gone, you're going to sell the house and move and live somewhere else? So that that might affect it a little bit depending on what the ultimate goal of the house is in relationship to you living there. But the ultimate goal is going to be either, if you got to sell the house, you have to empty it 100%, right? Like nobody's going to take your parents' stuff. So you have to empty it, which means you got to process all that stuff. If you're going to live there and you're going to say, oh, he says, family house, we've lived here since forever.
I will inherit the house, he says.
Oh, okay. All right. So your intention is to stay there. So then this is you have to think of it as a redecoration project almost. Like the idea is that the family house has had the flavor of the people that have lived in it all along. And every generation that takes over the house changes the house contents, changes the changes the way that the furniture is laid out. They might change,
What room serves what function.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're going to reclaim it for their own use in the current generation. And so this is where you are now going to sort of unwind how your parents use the house, and you're going to set it up for how you're going to use the house. And so thinking through, okay, now I'm the master of this domain, that I get to imprint my needs, wants, desires, expectations on the house. And how am I going to go about doing that? And so you're going to end up dismantling some of the things that some of those setup that your parents did, and instead go in and set it up the way that you like it. And so that dismantling, again, will still feel, it will be a grief triggering response. And so depending on how long it's been since your parents passed, it's going to make it hard. You can work in areas that are not, super triggering. Like if you're going to like move in and take over the master bedroom, for instance, then maybe you need to extract your parents' personal belongings out of there in order to move in and put in your personal belongings, that kind of stuff. You're sort of like peeling off a layer and putting on a new layer of stuff that is related to you. And so that process might be painful or difficult, and you may have to do it in stages. But just like, who was the person that did the tittle this morning? What was her name? Sarah. Just like Sarah was saying, she did the hospital stuff first, and then she did his clothes and things he didn't wear very often later. And she kept the shirts that he wore more frequently because they're going to be a quilt. And there was all these like stages of things that she did in the house, and that she did when she felt emotionally capable of doing. And so there's going to be a million things to do in the house. So if you like the grief is really strong, then maybe you can work on things that aren't like super tied to your parents. Adjust the kitchen layout, go in the garage, pick one of the guest rooms that nobody was using and work on that until you get to a place where you feel like you can, okay, I'm ready to go claim the bedroom that you used to sleep in. And maybe I want to change the mattress out, and maybe I want to, I need to make sure that all my parents' personal items are out of here. And maybe I want to rearrange the furniture so I feel a little bit better about it. Like you can tackle that when you feel up to that level of challenge. I'll say that we got to a point with this estate where we hired the moving company to gather all the furniture that needed to be distributed to the various siblings' homes. And as we were moving, that, the movers were taking all these big pieces of furniture out into the truck, I could tell that it was really hard for my client, because she was sort of watching when the furniture starts to move, then you're really dismantling the way that you see the house. Like you're really dismantling mother's house by having all this furniture disappear. And it was difficult for her to watch all of that go out the door. And it is part of the, you leave the planet and then somebody has to dismantle your life on the other end. So depending on how much change you want to make and how many things are going to leave to go to other people, and it can be very triggering when you start to disrupt the way that it's always been, what you think of as the way that it's always been. But the truth is, it was that way while your parents were in charge of the house. But when your grandparents were in charge of the house, it was different. There was other furniture. There was different things there. It was, there was other things that personalized it for the grandparents. And so you think of it as the way that you grew up in it, or the way that your parents managed it while they were living there. And that's not the only life that house has had. It's had a whole bunch of lives at this point. And you're now in charge. You're the steward of the house, and you're going to lay your imprint on the castle, I guess is the way to think about it.
Wolf, who's with us on Facebook, says, for inheriting the house, maybe take a short break if possible, a weekend or a week away from the house, and then coming back would help to return with fresh eyes and less overwhelmed or emotional.
That's a good point. Like go and sleep away somewhere else for a little bit. I like that idea. That's a kind thing to think about, is to give yourself an emotional break from the space. Yeah, I can see that would be helpful.
Okay, we should talk about next week.
Oh,
It's getting on toward that time.
It is.
It's October, so the season of giving and of giving stuff away is right around the corner. How do we decide to donate or gift something, and what does it mean when we choose to hold on to stuff instead? Next week, we're going to discuss ownership, gifting, donation, and how our judgments of value impact our decision-making about what we keep and what we're willing to let go. Watch your email for an announcement. That's next week, Tuesday, October 17th at noon U.S. Central Time. Why don't you give us the tittle?
Okay, this week's tittle is negotiate for what you need. This week's assignment is to engage a member of your family or household in an organizing task or project. For example, an audience member mentioned needing her husband to make decisions about old tools that he never uses, but that are taking up a lot of space in the garage. So as you discuss the task or area in question, set aside your judgment, your blame, and any history the item or the project may have. Focus instead on things on which you can agree and on constructive ways to move forward, such as improving your communication about the situation, how you use your space, and your shared roles in caring for your home. Learning more about and accommodating one another's different tastes, habits, and organizing styles, very important. Clearly communicating your needs about organizing to the family member or to the housemate in question, so that everybody understands what they specifically need to feel around that organizing project, what they're trying to accomplish, what makes them feel like they've gotten the end result they want. And you also want to negotiate specific solutions to address the most problematic areas, the things that bother each of you the most. And I know you'll be surprised. You think you know what your spouse is most irritated by, but I bet you'll be surprised. I bet there'll be some area they'll be like, what? That bothers you? Why? And so having that conversation about this specific thing makes me insane. And if we can address this, then I will be much more relaxed and happy.
I will be less insane.
I will be less insane. And having a conversation about those specific things, those specific problem areas, and coming up with solutions to address it will be really great. So go and have your conversations and come and tell us about how that went.
Okay, well, I'm going to share one success story from the comments before we go.
Cool.
Randy says, my son was here to help me with the basement last weekend. I had a large garbage bag of his stuffed animals that he hadn't been ready to release in the past.
Oh,
they all went out without him batting an eye.
Yay!
He's 41. Better late than never.
Better late than never, right? Like, oh my gosh.
Hey, that's not even all that late, honestly.
I love it. Well, and I'm super glad that he came to help you with it. Like, it's wonderful that you guys were able to share that basement task. I'm sure it was big, and basements are always a big stash hidey hole. So I'm glad that the son came to help you. Good job.
If you're watching this on YouTube, we would love for you to join us live. To get notifications about upcoming events, we invite you to join the meetup group by visiting cfhou.com/meetup. You can also follow us on Facebook by visiting cfhou.com/Facebook, or join our mailing list by visiting cfhou.com/subscribe. We love to hear from you, so please send your questions, comments, and topic suggestions on YouTube, Facebook, or anywhere that you find us. You can always reach us through our website at clutterfairyhouston.com.
Thanks, you guys, for joining us. You know that I love it when you come and listen to us chat. So we will look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.